All right, Armand, you are good to go, sir.
All right, everybody. Good morning and happy St. Patrick's Day. Hope you're doing well. Thanks so much for giving us time during your busy schedule. My name is Armand. I'm a CEO and founder of IT Management Corporation here in California. With me is Cisco team that will be covering cybersecurity and the threat landscape and funding. So I appreciate again the time. And if you do have any question during the meeting, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat and we will be monitoring that and respond to it. That being said, just want to give you again a quick rundown on the agenda. We'll go over what IT Management Corporation does, a little bit of overview of our services and the free offering that we have for the meeting. Additionally, Josh here with me and Cisco team will go over some of the security challenges, why cybersecurity insurance premiums have gone up and what can you do about it. And we are lucky to have Emily with us that will cover the funding source of for covering financial aspects of cybersecurity, as it can be quite expensive for organizations. Um, You guys probably know us or have seen us in various different events, MISAC and SITE and CASBO. We are known for our rolling blue bags. So in Southern California, Northern California, Central California, wherever there are any of these events, you probably have seen us in the last 6 or 7 years with the rolling blue bag. If you have not got your rolling blue bag, again, raise your hand, send a message. We'll be more than happy to send you a rolling blue bag. Or if you come 2 weeks from now in the Casbo Sacramento event, I will love to basically shake your hand and give you a rolling blue bag. So that's who we are and our services. We are a network infrastructure company from actual structure cabling, fiber copper, to the wireless access point to switches, to network security and managed services, along with voice over IP and lots of RFP response. We were established in 2019 and have offices throughout the entire California. We are C7 licensed and we are happy to be Cisco premier partner with various different architectural specialization. Collaboration is one of them, service providers another, and so forth. Along with Cisco, we work with various different brands. And for this event, we have worked with Cisco because the fact that they have done so much in security. And again, Josh is an expert in that field, and we're going to be diving in much more detail. But if you have any question about other products, please let us know. Our other brands are 101 Voice, Code Red Bridge, Polytons, which is network automation, uh, Galaxy Wi-Fi, which is outdoor Wi-Fi assessment and analysis, and One Number IO. But now, so much of our focus is on the SLED, government and education. And we also have various different procurement contracts, such as CMAS, GSA, USETPA, NASPO, and others, that it helps you with procuring your products without going through a cumbersome and tedious RFP process, yet be able to get very attractive and competitive pricing. So if you have any question about those, please don't hesitate to ask us. Some of the customers that are also joining this event, and I want to do a shout out and thank them, or some of your colleagues, are various different people in different counties, cities, and local school districts. So thank you for partnership. And if you know any of these folks, please reach out and ask them how they feel about us. And hopefully it would be flying color. Industry standard recognition and evaluation. We're lucky to have essentially been in so many different publications and awards. Best place to work nationwide. We make sure our employees are taken care of, because if our employees are taken care of, our customers are also being taken care of. Inc. 5000, various different awards and CRN and other technologies such as customer service and telephony. Now, again, St. Patrick's Day, I want to do a shout out. Thank you. I appreciate giving us an hour of your time. It's going to be interactive. Ask a question at any time. But for those of you who join us, please go ahead and book a meeting with us. 30 minutes meeting with us will get you 24 months of Code Red Bridge. And you can go to coderedbridge.com and see the videos, what it is. But bottom line, when it comes to safety and security, we think it's not only the network side that matters, but people's do matter. So Code Red Bridge is a platform that helps you communicate with your key decision makers during crisis. So it's a one number that you call, and it has automated workflow that will call 8 other participants, bring them on the call, that you can have a decision being made for your situation. 24 months, no question asked, use it or pass it on to others. So with that, I don't want to take too much of your time. Pass it on to my colleague Josh from Cisco, as he's going to basically explain more about security, because that's why you are here after all. And again, as a service integrator and value-added reseller with Cisco and various different brands, we are here as a facilitator. So if you have any question, ask us, and we make sure we put the right team in front of you. Take care, and there you go, Josh.
Thanks, Armand. Well, it's a pleasure to have everybody on the call today. As Armand mentioned, they definitely are a heavy hitter in the SLED space. That's one thing I'm not sure if was conveyed. We work very closely with them, and I think it is nice every now and then to have a partner that is focused on SLED. They know the lingo, they know the industry, government, and education quite well. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. For today's agenda, what we have in mind really is to dive into some of the challenges that our clients are facing these days. Top of mind has been cybersecurity insurance, reaching out for things like MFA. We are starting to see some requests for DNS and things like that as well. So really what we're going to talk about really high level today is kind of what's been happening in the threat landscape, some of the challenges that a lot of our clients are facing, and then what they're doing to address some of those challenges. We can dive really deep into the weeds at a later date, but for today, we're really going to be emphasizing 2 things because they're coming up quite a bit: MFA, DNS, and then funding. So what we'll do for, to start things off is just kind of talk about the threat landscape. And a lot of this is going to be, things that you guys are seeing for yourselves. Let's just kind of dive right in and talk about that. So, one thing that comes to mind right off the bat is the sophistication of the hacker. These guys are finding some very clever ways to bypass, especially a lot of signature-based solutions with things like man in the middle or, keylogger attempts or zero-day exploits. Stack that on top of the fact that a lot of the teams that are managing, these SaaS applications or solutions are pretty resource restrained, especially in the SLED space. Unfortunately, SLED doesn't have those big budgets or deep pockets. And so, unfortunately, oftentimes when they're making decisions, it's kind of a piecemeal ad hoc approach to security, if you will, where they're buying kind of the best of breed, but not necessarily focusing on any North Star, like a framework, for example. And then finally, stacking that perfect storm together, we're noticing that these bad actors are going after your Achilles tendon. So what they're doing is they're finding vulnerabilities, whether that's a lack of MFA or an issue between a siloed approach between departments. Oftentimes we hear DNS is managed by my NetOps team and not security. And because of that, DNS is a known vulnerability for bad actors to exploit as well, since there's no security team overseeing that oftentimes. So a lot of these challenges, are taking place today, and clients are wondering, what can we do to better protect ourselves and stay relevant and stay optimized? And that's really where a lot of these frameworks start coming in. Recently, we did, hear about NIST a few years back. That was rolled out by the Trump administration and signed off by the Trump administration. And that was a framework that really allowed us to not only look at our controls, but look at our processes around those controls and blend the two together to really ensure that our clients were focused on the bigger picture, not each individual solution, but how they integrate with each other, how they communicate with each other, because today integration, automation are key, because as you start adding more security controls or more networking controls into your environment, the need to manage those increases and the ability to manage decreases oftentimes, because we don't necessarily get the manpower to support managing all of these different platforms. So the idea with NIST and an upgraded version of that, which is CMMC. NIST was rolled out. A few years later, DoD announced CMMC. That was developed by Katie Arrington. She's the head of the DoD. Long story short, the difference between NIST and CMMC was developed for the DoD, but it's going to be rolled out to the entire SLED space soon. And where NIST lacked, CMMC went ahead and accounted for things like DNS security. So when a lot of these cybersecurity insurance are reaching out and asking our clients for, their status of MFA or where they're at with their DNS, what they're doing is directly applying the framework of CMMC or NIST to your responses and assessing your security response. And from there, they're giving you a premium increase or decrease based off of your responses. So if anyone was curious as to, why they're asking these questions, it's because these frameworks have been adopted as kind of a North Star to help our clients read through the noise and focus on the bigger picture. But also, as clients adopt these different types of frameworks and become compliant, the risk dramatically decreases. And that's the reason why you're having these cybersecurity insurance ask you about, your standings. For a lot of our clients that were already, CMMC certified, maybe level 2 or 3 where they wanted to be, they're passing those questionnaires with flying colors and their premiums are dropping or staying the same. But for those that didn't have MFA in place or didn't have DNS in place, they're failing. And sometimes insurance is saying, hey, we're not going to renew your contract, or we're going to increase the premium exponentially until you, put these best practices and measures in place. So with that in mind, clients are oftentimes saying, well, hey, this is being forced down our throat. We need MFA and we need it now. One that's going to be coming up pretty quickly with that same mentality is going to be DNS. And so that's why we're focused on these two subjects today. Another question that oftentimes comes up, though, is how do we source funds for these, right? And that's really where I think Emily comes in, because a lot of our clients just need help identifying what funds are available for them to meet the needs of, security. So with that in mind, I think I want to pass the mic over to you, Emily, and let's give them some information that I think could really help them read through the noise and get some funds to fund some of this stuff. After that, we'll dive into, why Cisco, or what Cisco is doing to approach some of these needs. And then we'll set up some next steps right after that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh. Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Moulton. I'm a member of Cisco's public funding team. Very happy to be with you today. Our public funding team, we try to be experts on different funding sources available to our customers that can be used to leverage technology. And today, of course, we are zoning in on the cybersecurity and the funding available. Just like Josh said, our customers in SLED are working on tight budgets. I know before I came to Cisco, I worked 9 years in higher education, 6 years in K-12 education, and I know what it's like to try to spin gold out of twine, so to speak, making the most out of a tight budget. And so it's always nice to talk about some supplemental funding that you could possibly leverage for some of these solutions. What is very unique during this time frame, which I would say since 2020 and even moving into 2022, there is extra funding available. And so what I want to focus on today is the COVID stimulus funding. Top left corner of the screen, and I've circled there, network security is an allowable use of this money. And for some of you, this COVID stimulus funding is very familiar. You've been hearing about it for the last 2 years. But for others of you, maybe you haven't considered how you could leverage this for cybersecurity. And so my goal today is just to call out how cybersecurity can be used or purchased with this COVID money, just in case this is not something you had considered. So actually, just to rewind, this COVID money is in such abundance. My pie chart is not drawn to scale there, but every single higher ed customer, private and public, every K-12 public school, even private schools in K-12, every local government customer has been allocated a portion of COVID money. And so prior to COVID, used to, our funding team only focused on big federal and state grants. So the top right side of the screen, that was kind of the only extra money, so to speak, that was out there to chase, other than bonds and E-rate, which we love those too, but those are mostly for K-12. But this COVID money, you can honestly think of it like every single entity has won a huge grant. And so you don't have to do any extra applying for it. There's not competition for it. It's really already in the hands of our customers. So for you, the CIO, it mostly comes down to asking for your portion of the pie from either the person in charge of the funds, your CFO, whoever that might be. And so that's why we want to just make sure you're educated about these dollars, making sure if you can access some of them, you do. And if you have some of these funds that can be used for cybersecurity, then it's a fantastic use of these dollars. So just to make sure you're aware, there are so many acronyms with the COVID funding. This is like our acronym cheat sheet, which in itself is kind of a blur of words, but just to call out a few things. For review, there have been 3 different acts of legislation that have authorized the funding. And so you may have heard CARES Act, that was the first act of legislation. Most recently, the ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act, that was passed a year ago now, but that's the most recent legislative act. And if you look under funds and deadlines, there are specific named funds for each vertical. So for K-12, you have heard of the fund ESSER, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. All K-12 public schools received 3 rounds of ESSER. And if you're a non-public school, you have access to a funding called EANS, E-A-N-S, Emergency Relief for Non-Public Schools. And that can also be used for cybersecurity. If you're higher ed, your fund is HERF. And if you look on the bottom right corner, the deadline's coming up the soonest or the quickest for the HERF money. May of 2022 is the deadline for most colleges. And then state and local government, there's a big old dollar sign, bottom right corner, $350 billion have been rolled out through the ARPA funds for local government and state government. So I just want to validate that these can be used for cyber security. So K-12 education. There was a letter that was sent from Congress to this U.S. Department of Education reminding them to remind K-12 schools that we want you, K-12 schools, to be investing in cybersecurity with this ESSER money. So for all of you who use E-rate, you know that E-rate is limited to just covering basic firewall. The wonderful opportunity this ESSER money provides is that it can cover what E-rate cannot. And so you can use this for advanced cybersecurity, the solutions that Josh has already talked about and we'll cover in more detail. Duo, multi-factor authentication, all of the advanced things that E-rate won't fund. And so please consider it. If you are a K-12 CIO, if you've already received a portion of ESSER from your administration, then consider using that for cybersecurity if you haven't already planned to do that. And this kind of compares, again, the different types of funding that's out there for education right now and how the stimulus dollars, those ESSER dollars for public schools, and it would be EANS, E-A-N-S dollars for non-public schools, you can funnel that into cybersecurity, advanced cybersecurity, in ways that we haven't always had this type of funding before. For higher education, so I'm showing you a slide of the guidance for spending for the higher education emergency relief funds, the HERF dollars. You do not see itemized anywhere here cybersecurity, but these funds can be used for any technology costs associated with a transition to distance learning or any expenses associated with coronavirus. And so we have seen a lot of colleges had to expand their networks and they have a lot more devices on the network, with students even being on campus, but taking classes out of their dorms instead of going to class. And so obviously securing that is of utmost importance. I don't need to convince you of that, but these funds can be used for advanced cybersecurity. We believe the guidance is just very broad and vague. The U.S. Department of Education did that on purpose to allow the most freedom and flexibility for the needs of the higher education institution. And so keep that in mind if you work in a higher ed school and your deadline's coming up really soon. We have heard some instances of some administrators who held onto the funds. They waited until close to the deadline to spend them because they weren't sure how they'd need to spend them. And kind of at this last hour, they're pitching the ball over to the security or the IT teams and saying, hey, is there anything you can use these funds for? We have to spend them. And security is a great solution if you haven't already invested your HERF dollars in cybersecurity. Just want to spend a little time on state and local government. So the ARPA funding for state and local government, they just released a new final rule, they being the U.S. Treasury. And in that new final rule, there were several places that cybersecurity was mentioned. Now, I had one local gov customer ask, can you give me some detailed examples in the final rule of how much cybersecurity is allowed? In his own words, he said, really, there's no limit. There's so much advanced cybersecurity we could do. Does the ARPA legislation limit it? The guidance is, again, pretty broad, pretty vague. You're not going to see specific security solutions mentioned, but that's kind of good news for us, and the fact that there is just a big umbrella, no pun intended, about cybersecurity being allowed to be funded. And the key word is infrastructure. So bottom right corner, these funds absolutely can be used to promote the continuance of government services and investment in cybersecurity modernization, investing in cybersecurity infrastructure. That is called out all over this final rule guidance. And so I would just encourage you, if you're a local gov or state gov, county gov, CIO, absolutely talk to your mayor, city council, whoever is managing these ARPA funds, and discuss getting a portion to invest in the critical cybersecurity modernization or basic infrastructure. Maybe you've never had the funds to do this in the past, but these ARPA dollars would be a perfect use of those funds. Just to highlight again, just how really broad and general this guidance is. If you look at the highlighted sentence, basically any service traditionally provided by a government. And so we know in this current era, obviously all the current events with even Ukraine, everything highlights the importance of cybersecurity for all basic government services. And so even though it may not be listed there in black and white, we absolutely believe cybersecurity falls under that general umbrella. Lastly, I do want to mention, so whereas the ARPA funding is actually in the hands of customers right now, there's also some funding that we're going to see down the road a bit. We're expecting maybe December of 2022 or the first of 2023, and that's coming from the infrastructure bill. I have highlighted here, there is a line item from that infrastructure bill specifically for cybersecurity, $1 billion. We don't have the guidance yet, hasn't been published, but what we've learned thus far is that the state will be able to keep 20% of funds. They have to subgrant 80% to local governments, and then a portion of that has to go to rural areas. And the goal is to address cybersecurity risks. And so let's say, worst case scenario, you don't get any of the ARPA funding, although I hope that you do. If you're a local government CIO, I hope you can use that ARPA funding for cybersecurity. But you could look down the road a bit to maybe this infrastructure funding. The question mark is, we don't know if this is going to be competitive funding or formula funding. The details just haven't been released yet. And so, I'd say go for ARPA while we have those dollars in hand, but keep this infrastructure bill cybersecurity funding in mind as another option specifically for local gov. And then please utilize the Cisco Public Funding Team. We don't function on a quota. We are here strictly as a resource, hopefully to be trusted advisors to you, the customer, when and if you have any questions about funding, what's available, what can be used. That's why our team exists. So don't hesitate to reach out to me personally, to our public funding team as a whole, and we'd be happy to assist you however we can. So that's what I wanted to share. Josh, I'm happy to take any questions or pass it back to you for the next portion.
Awesome. It looks like Amr does, by the way, awesome information here. And you always have a few more updates. So you're definitely staying current with some of this, which I appreciate. Two questions that came out of this last piece. One, it looks like Amr wants some slides. So if we can get that over to me, maybe I'll pass those along. And then it looks like Matt did call out the Rust DLT closed in June. Have you heard of that yet?
Yeah, so the RUSTLT is a fantastic federal grant. It more often funds collaboration solutions and video endpoint solutions. So actually, we expect the 2022 availability to be opening up here probably late summer. Um, so yes, it's a great grant. I don't think of it as a cyber grant per se, but I'm happy to, if anybody has questions, they want to learn more about that one-on-one, happy to consult with you. And yes, absolutely, I'll get these slides over to you, Josh, for you to forward on to the group.
You're awesome. Thank you, Emily. And Matt, if you do have any additional questions, you've got my email in there as well. It looks like Matt has a follow-up question there too. What was the fourth funding source on that slide?
Bonds. So bond funding can be a great K-12 funding source, and sometimes in local government. We see some local govs, especially in Texas. Different states are different in terms of how often they use bond funding and how little. Michigan is a big bond state. Texas, Arizona tend to be big bond states, but not every state is. But they can be great. That's usually they fund big capital campaigns and construction projects. Again, not typically isolated just to cybersecurity, but it can be. It just depends on the project.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Ian, you have a question here around Cisco providing funding for cybersecurity matters. We do actually have a finance team. It's Cisco Capital, and oftentimes our clients can go through Cisco Capital, but it's not necessarily free money. It's just funding. So, for instance, if you guys wanted to, look at a multi-year option to get some discounts applied for those multi-year discounts, but you don't want to pay upfront, there is an option for us to entertain paying annually or monthly, and we can have those discussions with you as well, along with your partner. And if you have additional questions about that, what I might suggest is, us setting up a one-on-one call. We can dive into some of that. And at the end of this call, I think Armand and his team will pop up another scan code for you to set that up if you'd like. And it looks like he said for discount equipment. All right. Well, yeah, go ahead and ping me at the end of this, Ian, and we'll take that one offline for you. Well, outside of that, Emily, thank you so much. If you can go ahead and do me a favor, just pass that along. Anyone who's interested in having that information, feel free to email me. It's josaleh@cisco.com, and I'll make sure to get that slide over to you, and then we can answer any additional questions you have around funding as well. Guys, this is really important. Oftentimes when I'm working with my IT contacts, one of the biggest frustrations is knowing that you have these vulnerabilities, but not finding funding for it, because that puts you in a position where it's only a matter of time and it keeps you up at night. And so one thing that I definitely suggest is taking a look at those slides. I know we have a scope of all different types of individuals on this call today. We have IT managers, we have CIOs, we have CFOs. So for some of you, this might not be your purview. Feel free to pass that information along to whoever it does relate to help you start sourcing some funds to close some of these gaps we have as well. And thanks for posting that. There's some more information posted in the chat box here for you guys as well for the stimulus allocations. Well, with that in mind, I think, we can go ahead and start diving into Cisco's approach here and what some of our clients have been doing to address, some of these major gaps. So I think a starting point here is really just talking about kind of what Cisco's been doing recently versus what they had been doing in the past. It's kind of funny when we meet with clients that haven't seen Cisco for quite some time. They oftentimes think of Cisco as a networking giant, but they have no clue that Cisco has really excelled in the security space as well. And if we look at the history of Cisco, obviously they had dominated the networking industry, and they got to the networking industry before a lot of other players. So they, grabbed that market share. Well, recently in the last 10 years, they've really pivoted and basically grown additional branches of their business. And the fastest growing branch of their business right now is the security space. A little bit of history there. Cisco picked up Meraki. For those of you that are familiar with Meraki, it's a very intuitive cloud-based dashboard. A lot of clients who are resource restrained, maybe they don't necessarily have the resources to manage things. They liked the simplicity of the Meraki dashboard, and also that you can manage multiple, solutions, whether it be access points, switches, firewalls, from a single pane glass in multiple locations. That really changed the game for Cisco because now they were seen as a security company as well, which they had already been seen as a little bit prior to that. But that's really where I think the tipping point took place. After that, Cisco acquired OpenDNS. For those of you that know of OpenDNS, it was the first of its kind free cloud delivered content filter. So obviously schools, nonprofits, government entities, they all jumped on that for free. But what that allowed Cisco to do is gather more data than really any company in the world. In fact, if we fast forward to today, Cisco Umbrella alone sees about 500 billion daily DNS requests. Let me pull this up real quick and show you guys. So if we're looking at yesterday's daily DNS requests, these guys averaged 516 billion daily DNS requests. Now, to put that in perspective for everybody, that's second only to Google. So what Cisco has done really to stay current is gathered more data than any other company in the world. And what they've done with that data is really mapped out the entire infrastructure of the internet. So long story short, what Cisco now has the ability to do is see which domains are associated to which domains, which IPs are associated to which IPs, what ASNs they're a part of, what countries they're going to, and where they're coming from. So essentially what's happening here is Cisco is taking a bird's eye view approach and making decisions based off of their data and their algorithms to support that data. So that's the big difference between these signature-based solutions, which are simply looking at a signature, versus these next-gen solutions that are actually proactively ingesting data and making decisions based off of that data. So with Cisco, they bought best-of-breed cloud firewall, then they bought best-of-breed DNS security, then recently they bought best-of-breed MFA. Now, for those of you that know of MFA, it's very common. It's pretty commoditized these days as well. Everybody does it. Microsoft, Google, Duo, one login, Well, the reason they bought Duo, few reasons. Duo is considered the best of breed in the MFA category. The reason for that being that they are truly a one-stop shop. So for a lot of our clients that have Microsoft, for instance, and they don't want to use Microsoft Authenticator, it might work well for Microsoft, but they're going to run into problems when they try to integrate that with maybe their third-party VPN or a lot of these third-party apps. And so where Duo comes in is it can be layered on top of everything as a one-stop shop, allowing your users to authenticate once and then get into all of those other applications from there. So for those that had to authenticate once through Google and then another again through Salesforce and then again through another one, this becomes their sole authenticator. Now, from a security aspect, it's absolutely seen as a security best practice to separate your identity provider from your authenticator. Let's say Microsoft's doing our identity management and they're breached. If they're also doing our authentication, we might have some problems. But by adding in Duo, now we have some checks and balances in place. So if there is a breach with Microsoft, Duo is taken care of, or vice versa. So that's another added win here. Finally, Duo does a lot of other things that a lot of the MFA products can't do. This might be diving a little bit into the weeds, but for a lot of our clients, they have other challenges as well. BYOD, for example. How do I install something on a device that I don't own without getting any pushback, right? Historically, your users are going to say, hey, I don't want Bigger Brother breathing down my neck or remote wiping my device. Those are all very valid concerns. With Duo, it's completely agentless. So we don't actually have the ability to remote wipe or look at their browser history. But what we have the ability to do with Duo is look at that device's hygiene and at least confirm that that device is safe before allowing our users to access that data. As an example, does this phone have a screen lock on it? If not, we can block it. Is it jailbroken? If so, we can block it. Is it coming in from China? If so, we can block it. So we can do geofencing and things like that as well. So for a lot of our clients that are challenged with other things like BYOD, Duo can not only meet the MFA needs, but it can do a lot of other things as well. So a lot of our clients like to land and expand, and Duo has phenomenal pricing for SLED accounts and for EDU accounts. So, where a lot of our clients are also finding value is not just that it's a simple, intuitive solution that integrates with everything, but it's also very cost effective in comparison to some of the other solutions out there. So that's pretty much Duo in a nutshell. With Cisco, they also have another best of breed product called Cisco Umbrella. And I do have a couple of questions here, so let me answer this one real quick. Victor, with OpenDNS, do I have to change my DNS hosting vendor? Good question. A couple of things when it comes to DNS. And guys, I think this is a crucial reason as to why bad actors are exploiting DNS these days. There's a little bit of confusion around DNS. Most of us think of DNS as authoritative, GoDaddy, for instance, and those are basically meant to protect your domain from DDoS attacks and keep your domain safe. But where a lot of us lack the expertise is around recursive DNS, and that's where we're finding your users getting you into trouble. As an example, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So for these click happy users that aren't educated and are clicking on everything, those are going to be your Achilles tendon. That's going to be your vulnerability. So the idea with a DNS layer of security is that it's keeping your users away from their own bad habits. Let's go over kind of an example of how that might work. A lot of our clients, they have MFA in place, they have, a firewall in place. Maybe they have off network users though, right? Especially with COVID, now they've migrated to the cloud. More of their users are accessing, SaaS applications, and they're not VPNing a lot of time anymore because they are working out of those SaaS applications. So in that example, we have a user that's working off network, but they're not yet VPN'd in. Let's say they were just working out of Office 365 or G Suite or something like that. Well, when that user is working off of their laptop, at that time, the only thing protecting them is the antivirus. Well, here's the thing with antiviruses. It means that that malware has already made its way to your endpoint, first of all, and that's your only line of defense. So what that AV layer does is protect that device from malicious activity. What it doesn't do, though, is secure the traffic to and from. And that's where we're finding a lot of malicious activity going on. As an example, we have an off-network user, maybe connecting from home or from Starbucks or from the airport. When they're connected to that Wi-Fi, we have to worry about man-in-the-middle, keylogger attempts, and all of that because SaaS applications are encrypted. You don't worry about Office 365 or G Suite much, but what you do worry about is that DNS traffic. So in that case, what Umbrella does now is encrypt all of that DNS traffic on that DNS layer. So you have end-to-end encryption and basically no visibility to bad actors. So to answer your question here, Victor, when it comes to changing your DNS, you're only going to change the DNS on your DNS forwarders. And that's typically found in your guys' domain controller. So you'll log into your domain controller, you'll click on forwarders, and 9 times out of 10, it's already pointed to OpenDNS. But it might be pointed to Google or your ISP as well. So if it's not already pointed to OpenDNS, you log in, point it to OpenDNS, and that's it. After that, any device that's on your guys' network is completely protected once we add in those networks as well. So these are all discussions, we can dive a lot deeper into the weeds about, but does that answer your question, Victor?
Josh, one of the things that I want to discuss with you is that when customers, especially in the SLED market, they deploy MFA, one of the issues is that they need to essentially apply or install some kind of application on the cell phone or some kind of wearable device, because the idea is to basically have another source that can basically, it's always with the person and can be basically verified. In the SLED market, the question comes in that employees may have their own cell phone or their devices, and they do not want to install another application. And if so, then they would expect the entity to do a reimbursement for the use of the cell phone and so forth. And that can also be costly for city government or education and so forth. So what does Duo have when it comes to situation that MFA is needed, but then users just don't want to install app on their device?
Good question. And you're absolutely right. That does come up quite a bit, in fact. And so to answer your question, Duo does have multiple authentication options, right? The most standard is that push notification that you're talking about. I think statistically, Duo is seeing 92% usage. So 92% of users are using the push app. And the push app is downloaded, from either, I think it's the Google Play Store, I believe it's called. Or I'm not an
Yeah,
iPhone user, so I'm not
Google
sure.
Play or App Store. Yes.
Exactly. So once they download it from there, that's going to be the method to use push notification or authentication. But for those users that might not have a smartphone, or for those users that might not be IT savvy, right? It does come up quite a bit. So one thing that sets Duo apart is that not only are there multiple authentication options, we don't just have to do a push notification. We can do a passcode, we can do a YubiKey, a hard token, we can even do an SMS. So there's multiple authentication methods that will allow different authentications. And what's nice with Duo is the admins can go in and they can choose what the end user has the ability to choose from, and then give their end user the ability to just choose what makes the most sense. Or they can force certain things. We can also base that off of the type of device that they're on, right? So if they're on a trusted endpoint, maybe an endpoint that you guys already know, we can have a different set of policies if that's a corporate issue device. But if it's a BYOD, we can also treat that a little bit differently as well.
Sure. You mentioned hard token. Do you mean by key fobs that are essentially like the old RSA kind of has a digital display? Is that what you mean by that?
This has a digital display and it pops up a code. And exactly, that code's updated every 30 seconds to a minute. And
Sure.
what you can do is use that code to go ahead and log in. It's not the old school USB one though, so you're not going to have to plug it in that way at all.
Yeah, we see that in the schools and other larger entities that this token or fob can quite come handy. So,
Yep,
go ahead.
absolutely. Another thing too, since a lot of clients are focused on MFA right now, just being completely frank, most clients know that MFA is needed. They just haven't enforced it just yet. And when I ask them why, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're worried about what their end user is going to have to jump through. A lot of different hoops. They say that their end user is not the most IT savvy. That's one reason why I like Duo a lot. I come from a background working with other companies as well. I've seen a lot of other, players in this space, OneLogin, Okta, Microsoft. They tend to be much heavier lifts. With Duo, because it's not doing any type of Active Directory services, they're not your source of truth. They don't do any source of truth for hosting your identities. All they're doing is the authentication. The setup is a lot easier as well. So we can spin this up from an admin side in a matter of minutes versus weeks. And that oftentimes is all handheld through support as well, which typically when I see other platforms, you have to pay for deployment services and fees. But with Duo, that's not the case because it's such a simple setup. Another thing is when it comes to the end user experience, I oftentimes get pushback because I'm told, hey, my end user is going to have to jump through additional hoops and that's going to frustrate them. Well, when we look at the single sign-on, it's my understanding that Microsoft charges us for single sign-on. We have to pay for the additional upgraded licenses. With Duo, it's built in for free. So if we end up finding out that our clients are using 5 or 6 different applications, we can spin up the single sign-on for free at no additional charge. And now their end user authenticates once, gets in, and now they have access to all of those SaaS applications. And it can be role-based access or department-based access. So we can segment who has access to what. So not everybody needs access to everything. We can give marketing access to Facebook, but restrict others, for example.
The other thing is that I often see when it comes to, you said, DNS protection, not only Umbrella provides DNS protection, but also does content filtering. Do you want to elaborate a little bit about that? Because that has also been an issue I know in the K-12 education, but there are other type of content filters that other government entities are looking into.
Absolutely. And that one's kind of a funny one because if we look at the history of OpenDNS, it started as a content filter, but I think of it as much more than that now, as well do most experts in the space. So when I'm looking at a content filter and I'm looking at OpenDNS, I no longer think of them as the same thing, but as you know, there's a lot of overlap these days. So we do see OpenDNS or Umbrella compete against products like Barracuda or Lightspeed or GoGuardian, right? GoGuardian, Lightspeed, they have their own bells and whistles, as does Barracuda. This started off as a content filtering solution. So as far as the setup, it's the easiest of all of them to spin up. And it's also the easiest to manage. Hands down, that's the truth. Now, where GoGuardian might excel is that sometimes staff likes to take control of who has access to what. Umbrella won't allow that just yet, right? It is something that's being discussed, but because it's more seen as a security product, they don't want to give your average Joe access. They want to make sure that it's only the security team that's able to access this, because what we're starting to find is with today, clients are getting so overwhelmed with the amount of solutions that they have to manage. If they can find a solution that does multiple things and it does it well, they're willing to replace things. And so what I'm starting to find is that they know they need DNS security, but they're finding that if they pick up Umbrella, they might not need Lightspeed. They might not need GoGuardian. So they're able to now justify the expense because they're cutting an expense in one area to basically pay for it as well. So you get some overlap here. I would say you're getting DNS security. And talking about the architecture is important too. When it comes to firewalls, I'm sure everybody on this call has a firewall. When it comes to antivirus, I'm sure everybody has an antivirus, and most of our clients probably have MFA as well. How many MFA tools are they using is the question, and maybe they can simplify that to once again, streamline everything. But when it does come to the layers, DNS is still something that we're finding lacking almost everywhere, right? And that kind of is an interesting subject because it becomes your first line of defense and your last line of defense. Let's go over just another hypothetical. As soon as we deploy Umbrella, which by the way, it takes 15 minutes to spin up. As Victor asked, we just go into your guys' domain controller, point the forwarders to Umbrella, then we log into the cloud dashboard and add those networks to the cloud dashboard. After that, every device that's on the network, completely protected. So that takes 15 minutes. But what that does is as soon as we deploy it, you'll notice up to a 98% reduction in the amount of noise coming into the firewalls because this becomes that first line of defense. But if anything slips through the cracks, let's say, for instance, one of your users gets an email, and obviously your firewall is not going to scan that. So as it comes in, if that user clicks on it and maybe your email security fails you, or maybe you're just using what's native to Microsoft, not necessarily the best layer of defense there. If that user clicks on that link and it resolves through DNS, that's when Umbrella would kick in as a last line of defense. So as far as use cases for Umbrella, ransomware and phishing are amongst the top use cases for that. And that also is top of mind for the majority of our clients these days. So knowing that you can have a DNS security that's protecting your user against their own issues, and also finding IoT devices that are infected, right? What we're finding a lot of is devices like IoT don't have antiviruses on them. So if we do see some command and control, that are beaconing information bad out to bad actors, Umbrella can detect all of that because it sits on top of everything and it doesn't have to be agent-based. From there, we can get that internal IP granularity by spinning up some virtual appliances, integrating with Active Directory, or even the roaming client. So for users that leave the network and they're not VPN'd in, there's a really cool agent called the roaming client. It's only 5 meg and it won't, slow things down. But what it will do is immediately as that user leaves the network and they're not VPN'd in, it'll turn on and force that traffic to Umbrella. So no matter where your users are connecting from, and guys, this is why it's so important to stay current, to stay relevant. As you work, the way you work changes and your users work off network, we have to look at, that flow and make sure that end-to-end protection is there. And so now with off-network users, we can get that visibility to combat shadow IT, but we can also get full encryption across all protocols.
So you mentioned the first line of defense and the last line of defense. I mean, as a system integrator, we get involved with many different networks, various different size and so forth. And these IoT devices that you're talking about, Josh, they are all kind of different. There are sensors for HVAC, there are door access control, there are all kind of things. And IT is basically sometimes not involved in every single conversation. Maintenance department buys, let's say, a lawnmower that has some kind of IoT in it, and the IoT connects to the Wi-Fi, and before the IT knows, this thing is basically now sending packets out to bad actors outside the country even. So we've seen those kind of things, and with Umbrella, that is just so critical and so crucial that those kind of traffic was brought up to the surface. So IT, essentially in one pane of glass, they can see that, why am I sending traffic to XYZ country? And why is it going on 24/7? And why is it going on this little packets every 10 minutes? So we have been able to find things like that. So that's something I want to basically bring to your attention. You also mentioned phishing, which is a big deal, and ransomware. So thanks for bringing those up.
No problem. And to that point, I can't tell you how many times we've launched a light trial. We just said, hey, let's just give us some visibility. The nice thing about both of these solutions, Duo and Umbrella, is we can spin them up in a matter of minutes and not impact anybody's day to day. So that's another concern. Oftentimes when my clients do go through these POCs, it's a heavy lift. It takes a lot of time, and nobody really wants to budget that time into their day to day. Unless it's a mission critical type of movement that's happening. And so with these solutions, we can spin them up in a matter of minutes and forget about them. Literally set it and forget it. And I can't tell you how many times we've done that. We came back to look at the data, and right off the bat, we saw some fires, right? Instantly, their AV was failing them. Their firewall wasn't catching these details, but Umbrella did. And once again, why is that? Remember, why Cisco? They have more data than any company in the world outside of Google. But Google's not in the security space. So if you're, looking to partner with somebody that knows security, that has the data to back their decisions, then Cisco, hands down, is a top-notch competitor to everybody else that's out there. Another thing that I really want to drive home is you're nailing it. IoT devices, everything else going on. There is so much happening and so many opportunities for bad actors to exploit these vulnerabilities that you want to go with, a team that truly understands everything. And this is where we're finding these siloed approaches causing more harm than good. Because sure, you might have best of breed firewall, a really nice this, really nice that. But if they don't play well with one another, there are so many gaps in between there that's where we're finding a lot of issues. In fact, a lot of studies are showing, the leading cause of breaches are going to be APIs pretty soon, which I see that as well, these bridges, right? So what we're really focused on is bigger picture, holistic automation and integration, and what's called FSO, full stack observability. There's only two companies right now, and I'm going to be very frank. If you guys hear XDR, right, there's MDR, EDR, XDR. EDR was endpoint detection and response, and then MDR was an upgrade from that, managed detection and response. Now we have XDR. There's only two companies that I know of that truly can be XDR, us, Cisco, and Palo Alto Networks, and there's a reason for that. The reason being that they do truly sell everything under the sun, from networking to security to collab gear. So the nice thing about that is you can get full visibility because those two companies are working so much on integrations and automations. Now, the difference between Palo Alto and Cisco then becomes just the age they've been around and the data they have. So that's one of the reasons and one of the things that I really think sets Cisco apart. Not to mention their entire team from Talos, as well as the SecureX platform to integrate and stitch all of these controls together, just end up easing, not only the management needs for a lot of our clients, but their minds at night so they can rest peacefully knowing that, their security is taken care of.
Sure, Josh. So yeah, you mentioned a couple of great companies. And what I have noticed is also, you mentioned also about ease of deployment of Umbrella. To those of you that are on the call or in the meeting, A, thank you so much for your time, but B, ping us, scan our QR code, and let us know to have a meeting, because what I have seen Cisco do, they provide you 30 days, no question asked, Umbrella deployment. For that 30 days, you can essentially kind of get a visibility into your network, and regardless of what kind of firewall you have. Palo Alto is a great firewall. There are various different companies that we all do respect. And what I have seen with Cisco, especially on their security division, is that they put themselves as a part of the ecosystem, and they bring off the Talos and all the other data without you subscribing to everything else. So the data that you get from Umbrella is lots of good data that can basically be added to your network security layer and ecosystem, and you don't have to do a rip and replace. I hope you get the message that over here, both from IT management and then Josh and the Cisco team here, we are not about basically rip and replace your network. It's about finding a frame of work that works for you, that you can essentially deploy, thereby lower your cost of insurance, therefore by lowering the premium and have a better network. Also looking at the budget and how you can essentially offset this cost, along with other add-on modules such as MFA and Umbrella that are easy to deploy, but they are very impactful, that can essentially get you to that better ecosystem security than what you may have. One of the things, Josh, I want to share with you is that as we were doing the registration, one of the survey question was, are you looking into security? And I'm sure it's a funny answer, but about 50% of the folks out there responded that no security and waiting to be attacked. So love the sense of humor. And for those, I want to tell you that again, umbrella, 30 days free. You can at least get a protection for 30 days and don't need to be attacked.
Absolutely. And guys, on that note, one thing I will absolutely do, just so you know, I'm a security specialist for the entire California area. Most of you will align with me. So one thing I will offer up is just my assistance. We can work on these things together along with Armand and his team. Literally takes us a couple minutes to spin up. But before we do that, a lot of you might just want to see, you know, a demo and have more of a tailored one-on-one. So with that in mind, if you scan this, scan me, you're going to be able to set up some time with the ITM team, and we can be on that call as well. Really just dive into the weeds to your specific needs. And, you know, depending on how that conversation goes, whether we drive into some demos or more just discovery to get you the information you're looking for, if you guys do want to spin up some trials, we can absolutely get you access to those. And I can hold your hand the entire time to make sure everything's set up, set it and forget it. And then, you know, just go from there. But it was a pleasure meeting everybody today. Any other questions here for anyone on the team before we part ways? Does Duo have automation for inactive or dormant accounts for protecting from rogue actors? So I believe, John, what you're talking about is the most recent thing that I've seen regarding bypass measures for MFA. Is that something that you're kind of hinting at right now with the rogue actors and these dormant accounts that I read upon? Okay, perfect. Yep, he said yeah. So with that in mind, there's a clever approach that Duo has actually patented. So heads up, this is coming soon. But to offset that, what they've realized is that issue basically can be resolved if we look at the SSID, so the Wi-Fi that they're connecting to. Basically, long story short, what Duo is now going to be able to do that no other company can do right now, because they patented this as soon as they saw it come out, was that bad actors are never on the same Wi-Fi as the actual user. And so now we can confirm that the device that they're authenticating on and the other device that they're trying to push the request through are on the same Wi-Fi connection. If so, they're good to go. If not, we can create policies to block that connection from happening. So that's to answer your question. And I think that would definitely address what you're looking out for. Well, perfect. It's been a pleasure, guys. For anyone that does want a copy of this, I will email it to you at the end of this conversation. Please go ahead and email me for that. It's josaleh@cisco.com. Emily's going to be getting me the info as well. So if you guys want the slide deck that she went over today, feel free to email us as well. Other than that, anything on your side, Amar, before we part ways here?
No, again, thank you so much. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate your time, and certainly to those partners, customers, and future customers that have been on this call. I appreciate your time. Don't forget, like I said, 24 months of Code Red Bridge, and just book a meeting with us, and we'll see what we can do for you.
Absolutely. Thanks for everybody hopping on here. Lots of shout outs too. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.